Okay, anybody willing to throw out a question, something that they wanted to make sure got addressed or answered today? I'm going to jot them down so I don't forget, and by the end to make sure that we got it all taken care of. You all showed up, so somebody has a question.
I know we had some questions on the NORA in terms of the support not documentation, but the reasons this recommendation was appropriate and the description of the options that were considered. We want to make sure
The narrative piece at the end?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I was going to address that, so that's good. Anything else? I don't want anyone to walk away from this, I'm not there, so I can sort of read body language, but not, not as well over video as I can if I'm in person. So it's always helpful to give you an opportunity to let me know. I just don't want anybody to walk away not having had something addressed. Just because you didn't ask me now doesn't mean that you can't as we go forward. I did intend, I will tell you, to go over the NARA, particularly to focus on that section on the narrative piece. It's why I have a couple other documents there, because you really need to have gathered that data before you can complete the narrative piece of the NARA. And also to talk to you about goals. Those were the two things that I had as a request beforehand. So I'm going to go over those. I think you were slated to be here till maybe noon or 11:30 or so. I don't anticipate my section with you taking that long unless you guys have questions, and I'll stick with you as long as we need to. I've blocked the time. I just don't think it will take that long. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen. If you could give me a heads up to make sure that, in fact, you are seeing it. 1 second. This isn't the one. Okay. Can you see the screen that says goal writing?
We see data collection.
Oh, let me switch that for you then. Sorry. Let me try this one. There it is. Sorry. All right, how about that?
Okay, we're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay, so I put that on the screen just so that you know what document we're looking at. It's that first white sheet, so you can read from your own page or up on the screen. I wanted to talk to you about what goals are, and when we're talking about goals, we're talking about that overarching long-term one-year goal, not the short-term learning objectives in between. And I wanted to talk to you about what they should be, what they shouldn't be, and some pitfalls that we tend to find ourselves falling into when we're writing GIEPs. And so some of those big things to point out is that your goals need to be aligned to either academic standards, or if you happen to be at the high school level and you have students that are taking college courses, for example, then those goals could be aligned to that college course criteria or expectations for that course. Otherwise, they should be aligned to the standards associated with the accelerated course or course that's being enriched for that student. It certainly should be aligned to the student's identification. I can't tell you how many times I've helped folks, and it's usually not the fault of the gifted teacher or the gifted coordinator. 90% of the time, it's the fault of the direction of the district. But where particularly often I'll see it at the elementary level, where maybe you've got a gifted program, which we all know we shouldn't have, but where every IEP has the same GIEP has the same set of goals. So I might have a student who is reading 2 or 3 years above grade level, and yet they're being pulled from class to go to a science event or a art event once a week, where kids get to do a science experiment or a neat art project. but that's clearly not aligned to the area of the child's giftedness, which is reading, and the child is staying in the reading class with all the other students on grade level, and not being accelerated or enriched in reading. So you want to make sure that your goals are aligned to the student's actual gifted identification areas. They should be annual. You want them to be evidence-based, so it's something that we can, in fact, track and gather evidence on. So you want to make sure it's written in a way that you can, in fact, check for that. Need to be based on the student's present level of educational performance. If you have a student that you've identified as working mathematically at the 7th grade level, then their goal should be to be mastering or being accelerated in mathematics, to be at least 7th, maybe 8th grade, depending on how high in the 7th grade content. So keep those kind of things in mind. What they really shouldn't be, when I say extra fun things, I'm talking about all the really cool stuff that we often do for our gifted gift and ed students, whether they're academic games or Odyssey of the Mind, Math 24, a really incredible field trip that is tied to some great activity that the kids are doing. All of those things are wonderful opportunities, and I'm not telling you not to do them. They just shouldn't be written in the goals. Obviously, they shouldn't be based in art when a student is gifted in reading, for example, right? Any questions about that so far?
I do have a question about that.
Yeah.
If I realize you don't want to put those, as a blanket statement for all of the students, but if you have a student who is accelerated in math and you're listing those math competitions in particular, is that appropriate? Are those not to be there at all?
They shouldn't be in the goal section. If in fact you want the student to be doing those things, they could be listed in a couple of ways. If you can find a way to make it appropriate in the short-term learning objectives in terms of what you expect them to accomplish in those games, if you can make an alignment, if the goal is about the standards and you can make an alignment from those academic games or that contest or competition or event, you can make them alignment to the standards. You might be able to put it in the short-term learning objectives in getting to that overall goal, but more likely in the GIEP section, you don't have to put it in. It's not necessary. Doesn't mean you still can't have the kids do it. But you could also put it in the section under support services or maybe specially designed instruction. But it definitely should not be in goals. It's just not an annual goal. It's not necessarily tied to it. It can be, you can make a connection to some of the standards, but not going to be to the broad overarching, whole content of that course. Does that make sense?
Guess I meant, yes, I think I meant falling under a goal that, if the goal is a math goal, is a way to accomplish that goal, including some of those things.
You could, but I would put them in the short-term learning objectives section, not under the goal. Yeah. Okay. Just make sure that you're really careful about being able to make that direct connection and putting down the evidence pieces and how you're going to know. Because it can be, if you put down academic games, for example, and a student can't go to the academic games, then you didn't meet that goal. So you definitely don't want it to be in goals, but you could have it in short-term learning objectives if you can make that connection.
Okay.
Other questions about that piece so far?
Nope.
Go ahead. Ask all you want. Oh, you said nope. Oh, okay.
No, I don't think.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. So the next thing I want to talk to you then would be about a really good rule of thumb. When you're designing your goals, if you can think of this little example here of when you're writing goals, think CNBC. What's the condition? Who is the student or the name, right? So condition, name, behavior, and criteria. If you write goals in that way, what's the condition? Who's the child? What's the behavior? What do we expect the student to be able to do? And how are we going to measure it? If you can put those four things together, you will have a good, solid goal. So in terms of condition, think standards, think expectation of the college course, right? So I have three examples, three goal starters at the top here. And the first bullet matches the first bullet in each of the four areas. So given the 8th grade math standards in numbers and operations and algebraic concepts, given the high school PA core ELA standard to read and respond to informational text, given the 3rd grade standards in biological science. Those are all conditions. They reference the standards, they reference a college course expectation, etc. That's the condition. Then I have the names. Obviously that's self-explanatory. The next concept would be the behavior. What will the students do? So will demonstrate understanding and application of algebraic concepts. Will demonstrate the ability to use evidence from informational text to make connections among ideas and between texts. Will demonstrate knowledge of the life cycle of plants, water, and animals. Nobody's going to call you on this. It's just sort of a good rule of thumb, or a good way when you're designing standards or objectives. If you had on there will understand is like a state of mind, right? It's kind of hard to determine whether or not somebody understands something. So they can demonstrate that understanding. They can demonstrate their ability. They can demonstrate their knowledge. So it's often a good idea to put your goals or objectives in terms of something that is observable through some type of evidence. So if you're following along, like the first goal, for example, given the 8th grade math standards in numbers and operations and algebraic concepts, Carlos will demonstrate understanding and application of algebraic concepts, and to what extent, what's the criteria, with an average accuracy of 85% or higher. So the expectation would be, as Carlos is working through the 8th grade math course, which maybe is an accelerated course for him, that he would be earning 85% or higher in all of the content that is related to numbers and operations and algebraic concepts. Continuing, we've got the ELA standard for Andrea. She's going to demonstrate the ability to use evidence from informational text to make connections among ideas and between texts. And she's going to demonstrate that by earning a 3 or higher on a project-based assessment rubric. That could be a classroom assessment. It could be a district rubric, could be a statewide rubric. I just wanted to demonstrate that you don't have to use percents. You could use rubrics or portfolio criteria, etc. So, questions about condition, name, behavior, and criteria when designing goals?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, 2 questions on the goal examples. So, first of all, are these supposed to be annual goals?
Yes, these are annual.
So, I don't see how, it seems that the examples are a little bit specific for an entire year, that we would study life cycle of plants for an entire year. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And the second thing was, I believe we've been told not to write science goals, just to keep it to math and reading.
Okay, not sure who or why you would have been told in terms of science. You should be writing goals to a student's area of giftedness. So if a student is identified as having a gifted need in science, that's where you're going to write the goal. Can you tell me where you heard that, or is it just been past practice, or?
Hey, Christine, this is Mike Lewis. How are you?
Hey, Mike. Good.
Good. Hey, so I'm sitting here with Paul, and the reason he brought that up is because, as you know, we had our gifted audit last week.
Did Shirley tell you that?
She did, actually.
That's very interesting.
And between her and the 2 peers that she brought, their interpretation, and that's kind of how I kept putting that out there as my argument to them, that their interpretation of chapter 16 and ours wasn't clearly the same.
Yeah.
But what they were trying to explain to us was, and the example that they gave, which I argued with, was that if a student is gifted or has strong skills in math, then typically they have strong skills and are gifted in science, which I argued because I can see the connection between math and chemistry, but not necessarily math and biology.
Sure.
But they stuck to their guns on that. Actually, Shirley specifically had a conversation with Marina on that and kind of reinforced, again, what I would say is her interpretation of that. So that's where that's coming from.
Okay, well, that's good information for me to know, and I would say that I would take that. I would take that information. Shirley Curl is our current advisor at the Department of Ed in terms of that. So I think I would maybe keep that information.
In our pocket, not in
Yeah.
our IEPs.
Yeah, and I would do. In every instance, I do what's in the best needs or best interest of kids. That's just always my bent. But
That was my argument back as well.
yeah, but because I could very easily argue that a student that's reading, doing incredibly well on response to informational text, which is a standard that is expected by the end of the course, by the end of 9th grade course, the kids will be able to read, respond, and apply informational texts. I could very well see that a student who has that strength and is gifted in that area would do very well in science and social studies and might in fact be talented in those areas in terms of being able to read informational text. So I think you could argue both math and reading, you might find somebody who's talented in science. But again, if our advisor at the department is telling us to stick with math and reading, I think that's information you should know. And so I'm glad that you brought it to my attention. And it probably, in sharing this information with people in the future, I will probably not remove science, but in fact say recommendation from the Department of Ed is to stick with reading and math. But because I don't want to give people misinformation, but I think more in line of you that if I have a kid who's talented in science, I might want to, in fact, make sure the GIEP is addressing those needs. But that's just me.
No, I agree.
Okay. In terms of long-term, numbers and operations and algebraic concepts, for example, there's a huge section in numbers, operations, and algebraic concepts in the standards. That's a category. So then if you go underneath that category, there are a number of other smaller standards. So that's the reason I brought that up. Same thing with the life cycle. It's a pretty broad piece. There's a huge amount of information on plants. There's a whole section in water, on water. There's a whole section on animals and how those pieces interact. So I chose standards that were actually very broad, that when you go to your short-term learning objectives, you're going to be able to pull all of the pieces, whether they're chapters, sections, other small pieces of the standards, to be able to, or I forget what those words are called. There's that overarching standard, and then there are all the small pieces underneath. Those smaller pieces underneath would be the sections that you'd put in your short-term learning objectives. Was that Paul who asked that question?
Yes.
Paul, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just thinking back to training I had with Tanya Moret. And,
Yeah. Well, I
and
pulled
her-
the first one I pulled from her material, for example.
Okay. I just remember her saying that the annual goals should be very vague and broad, and it just seemed a little bit specific to work on that all year, but that's maybe just my interpretation of it.
Yeah, no, I looked, actually, I think I know what you're talking about. I looked back at training that we had in terms of goal setting, probably maybe even 4 or 5 years ago, and they were much more vague than the training I'm receiving now. But the short-term learning objectives aligned to those standards were a lot more specific than even this. But this is the overarching, okay, so I've got numbers and operations and algebraic concepts. There's a ton of stuff in the 8th grade standards related to numbers, operations, and algebraic concepts. All of those smaller pieces of that become your short-term learning objectives that do become much more specific. But overall, all of that content, when I look at all of it, my goal is that the student's going to get an 85% or higher, you know, in anything associated with that. So it is something that would go throughout the whole year. You can certainly be more broad if you want. My expectation for you, though, is that you have a condition that is related to standards. So if you want to say, given the 8th grade math standards in algebra, in the algebra course, you can do that. But it also then means your short-term learning objectives are going to be really long, because there's a lot more standards in the 8th grade algebra than just numbers, operations, and algebraic concepts.
So, excuse me,
ahead.
Lydia Holly from Central Valley. So
Hello.
how do you determine, based on a student's, like, you're looking at their scores in perhaps the PSSAs as well as their initial testing. In an overall math course, how would you determine which standards to reference?
Great question. Fantastic question. I have those data sheets that we were going to look at specifically for the NORA, but they would be used here as well. When you're gathering data on students, the first thing you need to do, if you remember going back to here, up here, based on the students' present levels of educational performance. So you can't just look at PSSA or those final assessments, for example. PSSA, Keystones, they're going to tell you how much content the student knew, but they're not going to tell you of what was being tested. But they're also not going to tell you how much more than that they knew. There's probably lots of stuff on that test that they didn't know. You need to be gathering data and from a variety of sources. Classroom teachers, how are kids doing on the work that they're currently, if we're focusing on math, as in this example, how are they currently doing in their math class? Are they above grade? Are they in content that's above grade level, or are they on grade level? Are they being accelerated, not being accelerated? I would do, if at all possible, have access to a diagnostic assessment. It's probably going to be your greatest resource in helping you determine present levels of educational performance. You have CDTs that are available to you at no cost. So if you don't have a current diagnostic assessment, the use of the CDT might be very appropriate because it adapts to a student's level. So if a student is getting questions right, it just keeps moving up. And when you get that report, you will see how far or below they are on grade level, what standards they're actually mastering. So if they're mastering standards that are a section of standards, for example, in this case, in algebraic concepts that are in 8th grade and they're a 6th grade student, then obviously that's going to give you a point of area of extreme talentedness and gifted where you're going to then maybe focus your objectives. Gathering input from teachers and really doing a great job of determining what the students' present levels of educational performance, you're going to see where are their great strengths. That's what you need to capitalize on. That's what you then need to focus on to design their goals. But if you don't have the data, if you're just looking at PSSA data and their original identification, that's going to be difficult. As much data as you can possibly gather is going to help you to determine where to focus that goal.
Right, so we're trying to look at areas where the students have already passed their grade level. Mastered everything in their grade level. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, so if you have a student that's passed everything in their grade level, they're doing incredibly well, using a diagnostic assessment, whether it's CDTs, NWEA, which is very costly, but a number of our districts have that.
I guess, are we meant to be trying to be very specific about the math skill, or are we trying to be, like, for instance, the CDTs, they're broken into 4 different categories.
Yeah, they're broken in the same reporting category.
That the category where they're maybe in the blue already at the beginning of a course?
I'm sorry, could you state that again?
So we would pick the category where they're already in blue at the beginning of the course, as opposed to the category where they're in red. That's what you're saying. Like the CDTs for algebra, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand the reporting that you're at.
Qualities and inequalities, algebraic concepts,
right.
Geometry, and something else. I can't remember.
Yes.
Number operations.
Right.
So we pick the category where they excel the most. That's what you're saying.
Well, let's say that you gave the 6th grade assessment and the student is in 6th grade or end of 5th grade heading into 6th grade, and you're trying to make determinations for next year, for example, and they are on target, or maybe they're just under green, maybe a little bit in red and a lot in green. That would tell me the student is present for all categories except maybe algebraic concepts, we'll say that. So that would give me an indication that, okay, well, this student is pretty much on target to start a 6th grade course and do well in that course as the course is designed. So do I need specially designed instruction for that student for those areas? Probably not, because the data that I'm getting back tells me this kid is, with the exception of algebraic concepts, is completely on target, that if I just put them in the 6th grade math class and did nothing else, regular 6th grade math class like everybody else, the student will do well with that content, is slated to be, for that content to be appropriate for them. But if I have an area that is significantly above what they would get in the regular classroom, they're already exceeded what the classroom teacher would be teaching, I need to have a goal for that, because I need to have specially designed instruction, or the student is not going to continue to grow in that area. Does that make sense?
Yes, more or less. And if the student is already accelerated and has blue in all of the areas, would I make 4 different goals, or just have one goal?
You could have one goal, just make sure that, but if you have one goal, your short-term learning objectives are going to be more, your short-term learning objectives would probably end up being, for example, if I was going to accelerate a student from a 6th grade class to an 8th grade math class, I might go to that 8th grade math teacher and say, okay, you need to give me your units of instruction. What are the units that you're going to be teaching over the course of the year? And I can use those units of instruction to help me design my short-term learning objectives to make sure I'm covering all of the standards for that course if I've decided it needs to be every category.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions?
Thank you.
Those were great questions. Okay, I brought up the present levels of educational performance. I can't tell you how critical gathering that information is, not just for designing goals, but also for completing your NORA, for really completing your whole GIEP, but determining where do we need to provide specially designed instruction. Because you need to figure out, before you write a GIEP and before you're going to write a NORA if you're changing placements, where is this student instructionally? Where is their present level of educational performance? And if we don't do anything, if we do nothing different than put them in a 6th grade class and they're in 6th grade, is that going to be an appropriate placement for that child? If they don't need specially designed instruction, I don't need a goal for it. If I'm at the high school level, for example, and the student is going to be taking a course that every other student has access to, and that course content is going to be all that student needs to do well, I don't need specially designed instruction for that student for that particular area. If I don't need specially designed instruction, I don't need to write a goal. If I don't need specially designed instruction at all, because the curriculum that's being offered to every student is meeting this child's needs, then I might probably not until you get to the high school level, but it's very conceivable you may no longer need a GIEP. So you really want to make sure, do I have specifically designed and specially designed instruction? Do I need specially designed instruction based on the student's present levels of educational performance and the courses the student is going to be enrolled in? Look at that alignment of those 3 things. Is specially designed instruction really needed? If so, then you got to write a goal for it. If not, then you don't have to write a goal for it. Okay. If there aren't any questions about that, if we're okay with that, go ahead, ask questions.
And I don't do the high school for free, but so if they are in all, and I completely understand what you're saying. and how that works. And if they
Mhm.
don't need specially designed instruction, then they may not need a GIEP. So
Correct.
how would you handle it from that point going forward, explaining to a parent that now they no longer need specially designed instruction, we're going to do,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
no longer have
It is-
GIEP, that kind of gets to be a little,
Oh, it does. There's no question. The reality is, particularly depending on where you live and the involvement of the parents, et cetera. It's a conversation that you can have. The reality is, can you have a GIEP? If you don't want to fight that fight, you can do it. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. It's just more people involvement. But if you can convince a parent that, look, here's where your child's needs are, you can pull up the data. Here's where your student currently is. Here are the courses that the child is enrolled in. These courses are well, maybe the child's in 9th grade, and typically most kids don't take this until 11th grade. It's available to the child. If, for example, dual enrollments is available to anybody, so you have kids enrolled in college whether they're gifted or not gifted. If they're available to everybody, and you don't have to have it, and I know you understand that. I get that conversation with parents can be tricky. The reality is that you don't have to have a GIEP. There are political waters to navigate. I don't know. And Mike Lewis is in the room. He might be an even better person to have this conversation because he actually works in a district. But I don't know. Sometimes you may not want to fight the fight. It might not be worth it. And just put together a GIEP that, quite frankly, says the kids are going to be doing what every other kid is doing. But that is totally up to you. But
Yeah, Christine.
Go ahead,
I'll
Mike.
jump in.
Yeah, I'd love you to jump in.
Sure. We actually, they did reinforce that last week, that we need to be looking more at really whether the student requires special design instruction or not.
Yeah.
And we have, I think right now, in the last couple of years, I think we have one time where we have identified a student as being gifted but not needed specially designed instruction.
Mhm.
And it was not an easy conversation with the parents, but when you can explain to them that they're still going to have all of these opportunities and be afforded they're really, at the end of the day, nothing is going to change other than they won't have to meet with us once a year to cover their GIEP.
Right.
The parents are okay with that. The tricky part is that and again, they reinforced this last week, that to do that, really, we should do a full reevaluation on the student, which we did not do with the student that I'm talking about. We just kind of used other data.
Uh-huh.
And so that was kind of the conversation I had with the state last week, was if you do that reevaluation, there's a very real possibility that student's still going to have very high scores, and on paper, still look like they qualify for gifted services.
Absolutely.
So having other data that supports that, they may have that score but not necessarily need enrichment or acceleration beyond what they would get in an AP class or in an honors class, is key to that. And as long as you have that documented, they were okay with that.
Yeah, I really think that it's critical to distinguish that and to have that conversation with parents, that just because the evidence here is showing us that, look, how great our district is, we have all of these opportunities and resources for your child, they're going to receive everything they need, and here's the data that shows that's what they need. It does not mean your child is not gifted. It just means we don't have to put together a program that has specifically designed instruction because the current curriculum we enroll them in is meeting those needs. That's really the difference. It doesn't mean they're not gifted. It just means they don't need a GIEP because they don't need specially designed instruction. But Mike, I'm going to ask you, I think I know what some other folks would do, but if you were in a position where you had a parent that was really tough, how would you just say okay and acquiesce and do a GIEP?
We're being recorded, right?
Hold on, I'm going to stop that. You want me to stop
No,
it?
I'm just kidding. I don't care. At the end of the day, we probably would, because to be honest with you, it's probably not worth fighting the fight if you know at the end of the day we're doing what's best for the student.
And we're still doing the same.
So
what we were going to do.
Feels that they need that blanket of security, then we probably would probably do it. I'm kind of speaking off the cuff here a little bit, but I guess it just depends on the situation. I do think you owe it to the parent to have the conversation at least though, so
I
they truly understand that their child is gifted, they have high talents, but just the opportunities you're providing them are meeting their needs.
Right.
But again, if they are really kind of pushing it, I would be willing to meet them in the middle and still develop a GIP that it is appropriate because it still would, highlight their talents.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not necessarily be so heavy on SDI, because at the end of the day, when you're being audited, they come in and they hold you accountable for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, could I ask another question?
Of course you can.
If you talked to the parent and said, I don't think that they need a GIP, wouldn't that parent have the possibility of then taking the district to court? Like based on their parental rights or something?
But you would win if you had the data.
Yeah,
You have the
they could.
Yes,
and
but
that's
it
why I
would
think it
still
comes
cost
back.
the district money. That's why I'm, like, if
Well-
they took you to court, then it would cost the district a lot of money. So maybe making the GIP would be the most cost saving.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that's why I was saying that if the parent was absolutely adamant, I would be okay with still doing that, just because at the end of the day, it is what's best for the kid, and you're not dragging anybody into court. So really, I guess it's just how that conversation goes with the parent and
Right.
their interpretation of.
Yeah. I think if you have I do think Mike is right that you owe it to the parent to have a good conversation about where the student is, and making sure the parent understands that you really are doing a great job of understanding the child's needs and what the data is showing the child does need, and that how those courses that you're enrolling the student in are in fact exactly what they need. If you can have that, I think you owe them the right to have that conversation. But if you have somebody who's just going to put their heels in the sand, I don't know that I'm going to bother fighting the fight, because okay, I'll just pull up a GIEP and I'll take the time to put it together but it's going to say exactly what is on the student's schedule.
Christine, this is
Yeah.
Sarah. I'm Henry from Beaver, and I just wanted to answer. I do gifted 7 through 12, and we've had a lot of situations just based on our course offerings where
Yeah.
students really don't need me in the high school, because
Yeah.
if we're writing goals, then we can't. It's nothing different, and
Right.
and I have found that in those one-on-one conversations, when I've been able to get to know the kid, I've known the parents usually since the student was in 7th grade.
Sure.
And I can look down the 9th or 10th grade and say, you know what, I just don't think you need me. And they'll say, you're right, we don't. And then we can come to an agreement. But I think it's that one-on-one conversation. Because what happens in the high school, I'll have a caseload of 15 kids and they don't need me, and writing 15 GIDs and making the meetings and gathering the data and doing all that stuff is so time consuming that ends up costing the district money too, just in terms of
Right.
times. But
No,
I
that
have
is-
found a lot of success in that conversation, and then being able to say to the parent, our district, if you come to a point where you feel like you do need me again, call me.
Yeah.
And we'll work it out and we can reinstate the gifted IEP. We would go through that process and it could be abbreviated. But generally, if we give the parents, like I feel like they think they're gonna lose something.
Yeah.
And if you feel like there's open line of communication, then they're willing to say, you know what, you're right, the kids are good, we're happy. And that's been very successful, so.
Thank you for that perspective. It's a great one to have. I think it really drives home the point of how important that relationship building is, and actually making sure you know the child well and that the parents know you and trust you and the work that you've been doing. I think that would go a tremendously long way to helping to have those conversations. And if they trust you, then you're right. And there is no reason you can't reinstate it. If we find, in fact, we were wrong, that there is a need that we've got to provide some acceleration or some enrichment, then yeah, absolutely, it can be reinstated. And having the parents know that that's the case is important too.
That's very, yeah,
I have a question. In that situation, is a full reeval necessary?
technically.
Yeah. that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
We can take, per the state, a lot of the data that I have to gather for the IEP anyway, like I have access to, so any sort of ALA level test, teacher recommendation, student parent is also data, so I have all of that. And so it can go through an abbreviated process. It doesn't have to be at least the way we do it, So,
And I have one other question. At the high school, really the only thing at Central Valley we're offering to our students that have a GIEP that isn't offered to the general ed curriculum is that they're allowed to waive PE 1 year. Where does that go in the GIEP?
They're allowed to waive what?
Gym, physical
They're
education,
allowed to waive physical education.
1 year.
How is that related to their giftedness?
It allows them to take an additional academic course.
Oh, got it. Wow, that's a great question. I'm also gonna throw this out. That could just be a policy that you could have in place. Mike, I'm gonna say some stuff, but I want you to give me some background on that, or tell me I'm in left field, or that you support this. If is it I'm gonna ask the question of the district. Is that a policy or a procedure? Do you know if that's a written district policy or that's just standard operating procedure?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I think standard operating procedure. I mean, they're not
Okay.
allowed to waive health. So if it's a year that it's a gym and a health, then they have to take the health cyber.
Okay, so it is, but you don't think it's written in a district policy anywhere?
I've never seen it written. That's just what I walked into when I started
Okay.
this.
That might be
I would
something.
guess that's a procedure too.
That's what I think too. And I would go back to, I would still go back to, all you're doing is giving a student some flexibility in the schedule to be able to take courses. Wow, this is a tough one, because the course is probably not specially designed instruction. It's a course that any kid could take, right?
Right.
It just so happens that you're letting them take 2 of them, for example, like 2 sciences instead of 1, by waiving the 1 course, or by waiving PE. I'm not sure it's specially designed instruction. It almost sounds like hold on one second.
Christine, I would look at that the same way that I would a student who is in special education, that you have to modify their schedule to meet their needs. So you're just modifying the student's schedule.
Yeah, but I don't
to
see
meet
that
their
needs.
needs.
You don't put that in the GI or in the IEP.
No,
Yeah, that's
no,
what
that's a local
I'm
control
struggling. I don't think it
kind
belongs.
of practice.
I don't think it belongs in the GIEP. And then I'm falling back on asking myself, if the course is something all kids take, is it specially designed instruction just because I altered a schedule?
Not according to what we were told last
What
week.
I'm thinking, I don't think it is. So I would go back to,
Is it not a support service?
That's what we're thinking. That's where I usually put it. The year that they waive
Yeah.
their PE, I generally put that in support services, just that stating that the PE was waived. Typically, we do it in 10th grade because that's a non-health year. The PE was waived this year, and so the student could take, Chem 2 or whatever.
right. But if it's not if in fact you were writing a goal, because a goal is needed, because specially designed instruction is needed, then it makes perfect sense that you would place that in the support service that, oh, by the way, to make sure this happened, we altered the schedule by allowing them to waive PE. I think that's an appropriate slot for that to go, if in fact you are designing a goal associated with that course. But it goes back, I think, to our previous conversation about, is a goal really needed? Is that specially designed instruction if all students could take that course? It's just our core curriculum.
What if
So I
they
think you have
took
to have weigh that first.
What if they took the course outside of the typical year it is offered? Meaning if it's a class for juniors and they want to take it their sophomore year?
And you only allow, otherwise, only juniors take it?
Yes.
And so the only kids that are allowed to take it are those that have GIEPs?
Sure.
Okay. Then it's specially designed instruction. If, however, you don't, you allow gifted kids to accelerate in there, and you also allow a kid who's not been identified as gifted, who happens to just be pretty strong in that core content. If you let kids take courses who are not identified as gifted outside of the requirement that you be a junior, then it's not specially designed instruction.
Okay, let me ask a hypothetical question. Completely hypothetical.
I'm no audit, so it doesn't have to be.
Happens.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
This never ever happens. Totally hypothetical.
Oh yeah, sure.
So you have a class that is only supposed to be taken by juniors. You have a sophomore who's in the gifted area and needs this class so that they can get everything they want to
Yeah.
take by graduation.
Sure.
So normally that would be written as a goal. They're being offered it something special and early because they're gifted. But you
Right.
have that one pain in the ass parent in the district that pushes the principal and the principal buckles and lets them in. Sorry. Not that that ever happens, but what if it did?
And they don't have a GA.
And they don't have a GIEP, they just caved on the parents pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and letting their kid into an honors class when they're not even an honors child.
Right.
Could we still do the GIEP for our kid and say, you're on your own for that? Ooh, look, she's quiet, I stumped her.
No, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to say this.
Technically, by doing that, you're taking that off the table. As
Correct, I agree.
Let other
Yep.
students.
And the problem is, though, you're going to have that you're going to be in the situation where you're having a conversation with a parent that says, look, we're allowing you access to curriculum that we already have. It's not really specially designed instruction. Let's look at the data that shows. So it continues to go back to that same conversation we just had about, do you need specially designed instruction? And that's why at the high school level, it's so often that the question, it may just be no. They don't need specially designed instruction. But in that specific example that I know you said is hypothetical and never occurs, you just said that is no longer a course, or this is no longer a situation where it's specially designed instruction because we let other kids take the courses who aren't identified as having a GIEP.
But if they shouldn't be in there and
Doesn't matter.
it's the fault of so if the principal can't have a spine and hold his ground, he or she screws it for the gifted kids.
Not really. They're not stopping the gifted kid from taking the course.
It just stops it from being in the GIEP.
Yeah, it's just not, if
It's okay. Okay.
If, in fact, you have a good conversation with parents and that can work, is it worth falling on the sword for a parent with a GIEP? I don't know that it is. I want to give you the legal perspective, which is no longer specially designed instruction. If you have a conversation with a parent and the parent is, really adamant that they still want that in the GIEP, is it something you're willing to fall on the sword for? Because in your mind, it really should have been specially designed instruction. We just shouldn't have these other kids in there anyway. I don't know that I would bother to fall on the sword for it, and I'd probably still leave it in there. But legally, it's no longer specially designed instruction.
Okay.
Mike, would you agree?
100%.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Go
I
ahead.
noticed- So, middle school,
Uh-huh.
and we only allow kids with GIEPs to accelerate in math.
Okay.
But then we get students who've come from a different school
Uh-huh.
who've already taken the math class that
Right.
would be the accelerated math class. So the district has to put them in the next
Sure.
math class. They've
Right.
taken pre-algebra, they're not gonna take it again just because they're in 7th grade.
Right.
So now we have one child with no GIEP. We test them hoping they'll be gifted, but
Mhm.
they're not. Now is our accelerated class an SEI?
I think you'd be in the same exact situation that we just discussed.
Sounds like the same situation.
It is.
Except that no other child, unless they have already taken the class somewhere else, they can't even they can't take it cyber over the summer on their own and come in.
Oh.
No. Only if they take it in a different district.
Okay, let me give you an out here. Let me give you an out as to how, and Mike, again, I'm surprised there's an admin.
Glad I can
Yeah, me too. I just want to make sure we're on the same page with this. I think I can give you an out. Instead of it being we don't accelerate kids, you didn't really accelerate this child. That
Oh,
child
right.
came to you, it's not really acceleration. They're just taking
Yeah.
courses in sequence. So
Okay.
instead of saying we don't accelerate, we don't allow kids to take courses out of sequence unless they're identified as gifted.
Okay.
Now you have specially designed instruction.
Perfect. But But it just says acceleration on the Nora.
Oh, no, it does. I'm saying your district policy is that we don't allow kids to take courses out of sequence,
Okay.
or your district procedures. So therefore, in this case, that kid that just came to you from another district who already took those courses isn't taking the courses out of sequence. So the next logical course for that student is this. Age isn't nearly as important as whether or not you've taken the course, right? Age and grade is sort of irrelevant. It's, have you taken the prerequisites? For a student that you've accelerated, they've not taken the prerequisites. So to me, that's specially designed instruction. Is that an out, you think?
You have a gifted student who chose not to accelerate in the 6th grade, changed her mind at the end of the 6th grade, and then we forced her to take the pre-algebra class in the summer in order to accelerate. Yeah. So as not to take the class out of sequence.
Because would the acceleration in the prior year have been to take the pre-algebra course?
Yes.
That's why. It wasn't not out of sequence. It was in order to accelerate into the other course. You felt strongly they needed the pre-algebra, that was missing. Had they accelerated prior, they would have skipped a year and gone into pre-algebra, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was skipped 6th grade math.
Did you, just out of curiosity, did you do like some kind of diagnostic assessment, for example, on the CDTs with regards to algebra concepts to determine that the student needed the pre-algebra course in order to accelerate, or did you just make that determination as a district?
The principal made the determination.
Yeah, I think for future reference that might get you into some hot water. Like, you want to have the data that supports the need for moving into courses. So I would make sure that I had present level of educational performance data that would show that the student either needed to take that course because they wouldn't be successful in the next course, or that they didn't need it and it wasn't necessary.
Okay.
That's just, I'd put that in my back pocket for future reference. Other questions about this? The whole goal, et cetera, this always gets pretty involved, especially when we start talking about specially designed instruction.
Okay, so we have a legally bound document and they don't achieve their goals. Where do we stand then?
You're going to have that where students don't achieve the goals that have been identified. Then you just go back to the drawing board when the next year, what goals weren't met, why weren't they met, et cetera. If a student's not meeting their goals, you can reconvene the team if you need to, if you want to. You need to look at what goals were met and what goals weren't met and why they weren't met. You need to have those conversations when you're designing the next year's plan.
I would jump in here too and just strongly advise that if you have data throughout the year that is showing that the student is not going to meet that goal, that you've at least pulled the team together once to make a revision.
Yeah.
That goal, because it will definitely frown on that.
Yeah. No question.
Can you now make revision without doing a whole team meeting, without doing the whole new GIP?
Yeah, you can.
Like you can do in a special ed IEP, you can just, okay. Because before you couldn't, right?
Yeah, you can go in and you can do a revision and just, we do revisions all the time and just either confirm with the parent over the phone or send it home for their signature. Rarely in a revision do we pull everybody together.
And you just do it in the IEP document and just do a new, but you don't send an invitation, don't do any of that. Okay.
Everybody okay on that?
Okay. So Nora just changed the placement, but you can change, okay.
I think we're good.
Okay, great. Does anybody not comfortable with the CNBC? Condition, name, behavior, and criteria when identifying or writing goals? Because I have the yellow sheet. We've been in an hour and I don't want to not do the Nora stuff. It was just an activity I was going to have you do. Is there anybody who, if you want to do the activity, we can.
I think we're good on goals.
Okay, I stopped sharing for a second just because I wanted to get a quick look at everybody again and make sure we're okay. Read a little body language. Normally I can only see what I'm sharing with you on the screen and not you if I don't do that. So, okay. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, I'm going to skip over the yellow sheet, but you can use that yellow sheet if you're confident with CNBC. You could use that with other folks when you're, if you're working with people and designing that. If you want the answers, just shoot me an email. Let me write that or give it to you. That's CLW at bviu.org is my email address. CLW, as in Christine Lynn Wagner. CLW at bviu.org, Beaver Valley Intermediate Unit.org. Shoot me an email and I can send you any of these hard copy, or I'm sorry, electronically, or I can give you the answers to that that CNBC testing sheet or, practice sheet. So the NORA, that was what I was going to move on to. The things that you're struggling with in terms of the new NORA or that notice of recommended assignment is the narrative piece towards the end. And what I'm going to tell you again, remember when I talked about present levels of educational performance and making sure you have all that data, as much data as you can gather, you're going to need that. You're going to need that to be well gathered and documented when you write that section. Okay?
So it is going to be a repeat of pieces that we have in the PLEPS is going to be in this narrative.
Absolutely. You're going to be pulling all of those things, no question. In fact, you're going to even find yourself maybe even restating some of that stuff. If you, in fact, pull up your pink sheet, I'm not going to put it up on the screen because I don't think that it's so tiny on your sheet. I don't think you'll see it well on the screen anyway. But if you pull up your pink sheet, you'll see this data collection sheet for Cameron, for example. The first page should say math at the top. Current instructional level, 6th and 7th grade. Got that? Is that what we're looking? Everybody looking at that? Okay. So you can see that they've gathered some summative data. First marking period for 6th grade was 97%. Previous instructional data for 5th grade PSSA, we had 99th percentile, 94th in 5th grade math overall. So that's summative data from the prior year and summative data for the end of that first 9 weeks for 6th grade. Formative assessment. Formative assessment, you're usually gathering this data from either smaller tests in between or just even input from the classroom teacher. Positive performance on 7th grade enrichment tasks, for example. Student is being enriched in that course and the tasks that you're asking them to do, they're having positive experiences. You're seeing that they are progressing well. A lot of times formative is an observation piece or smaller pieces of data that you're gathering. Current instructional level, this is where you're going to have the teacher telling you that, because again, formative is observational for the most part. So the teacher tells you he's acquired new materials quickly, he tutors others, he exhibited gifted characteristics in math. I'm not sure where they get 64% of the time. Parents report at least 65% of the time. This target, 64, 75, they're going to be pretty arbitrary, right? Because this is formative data. It's based on observation. Could a teacher have a checklist where they're actually checking? Yeah, so look, he's doing it here, not doing it here. Yeah, but I don't know how realistic it is to think that a teacher's done that. But they probably can tell you, about 60% of the time they're doing it, or 70%, etc. You gather some benchmark data, some diagnostic data, so you can see in the diagnostics on the CDT, they use the CDT level, 1195 on CDT overall on level range for 8th grade math. So when you look at the 1195 and you look at what standards the student is mastering, you can see the standard number, and you can tell that in fact that student, despite being in 6th grade, is in fact performing on the 8th grade level. Except for geometry, where on geometry, he was performing on the 6th grade level. Just following me so far on this? Okay, so if you go to the bottom of that sheet, after I've gathered all this data, I'm going to look at this data and I'm going to write a quick summary for myself. This is for my own use moving forward, right? Other people can see this, the team, the parents, etc. But I do this when I'm looking at this data because it's the time to think about it. All right, so Cameron's performance indicates he's working above his assigned grade level by almost 2 years and that he may need acceleration at this time. Where's the one area he might not need acceleration? Geometry. In geometry. But all the other areas, so we go back to writing goals, we might be writing it in just those 4 reporting categories and not in geometry for this kiddo. All right. Okay, so that's the math section. And if you continue, you'll see we gathered data in reading and we gathered data in science. same way, summative, formative, benchmark, diagnostic. I'm not going to go through all the data on there, but I do write a summary statement at the end, which says, Cameron is in 1 year of his current assigned grade level, and therefore it appears that he may need enrichment in reading and comprehending nonfiction. So in math, we're saying, okay, he's 2 years above grade level, so we got to do acceleration. Here in reading, he's working on grade level, so we probably just need to provide some enrichment there. And then if I turn and look at science, Cameron's within 1 year of assigned grade level and exhibits strength in nonfiction text. Enrichment of 6th grade concepts may be most appropriate at this instructional level. So in terms of designing a GIEP for Cameron, it's looking like reading or math, we definitely want to accelerate. In reading, we're probably just going to enrich. And if we're going to go the route of science, depending on what you decide locally, if you're going to go the route of science, then in terms of science, it also looks like enrichment. So I've got this data that I'm going to use when I write the NORA. Questions about that so far?
No, we're good.
Okay, yep. I just pause and I can see you and hear you, so it's okay. I just making sure. All right. So I gather all of that data, and I have that data, and we've used that data to design our goals, etc. Then when I go to the NORA, so you want to pull up your NORA, which is just a white sheet. Notice a recommended assignment. It should have been printed in white. Everybody have it? Okay. So in that, is there any question about this first section on what you're checking? This letter summarizes recently developed recommendations or proposed changes to your child's educational program or assignment. Do you have any question on whether you would check 1 through 7? Everybody's comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm going to flip to the back. All right. And you're going to check, for this particular, you can see at the top of page 2, you're going to check where it says this assignment was recommended after a review of all the options that were used to assist in identifying services and programs that will meet your child's needs. The assignment recommended for your child is, it would have been general education if the child was not identified as gifted, right? In this case, the child was identified as gifted, so we're going to mark gifted support. Then what are you marking? Enrichment, acceleration, or enrichment/acceleration? Okay. So there, in this case, the team has decided enrichment in social studies and science. They went with enrichment in social studies and science because it was for literacy, right? Literacy for the grade level, social studies and science. So you have that set of literacy standards for science and social studies that are in grades 7 through 12 for the state of Pennsylvania. That's what they're focusing on there. So literacy for grade levels, or literacy for science and social studies, we're just going to enrich. Student was on grade level in reading, but definitely could use some enrichment there. So that's where we're going to focus. Enrichment/acceleration combination in the following areas: 7th and 8th grade and algebra math. Okay. Enrichment or acceleration is we're just moving by grade level, right? But if a student is 2 or more grade levels above grade level, they're likely going to need more than just acceleration. They're working 2 years above grade level, but we're probably going to have to put them in that course that's 2 years above grade level and provide some additional enrichment to that course. So you've got enrichment, which everybody understands. We have acceleration, and then we have acceleration/enrichment, which is accelerating, but also then enriching within that accelerated area. We okay with that? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, question?
You have 7th, 8th, and algebra. Would that be for the 1 year, or are you projecting ahead?
For this particular, actually, I probably should have looked at, I'm not sure why. This is the example that PD sent now that I'm looking at this. Let me go back to the present levels, because I think they did the same thing with the math. They looked at the 6th, and so the student must be addressing standards because of acceleration in all of those areas. 7th, this IEP is going to be 7th, 8th, and algebra math, making sure that we're not missing anything for a child. You know, if you accelerate a kid to 8th grade math, there might be a standard or something missing.
Specific 7th grade concepts that might be coming up on the PSSA? Is that
Correct. Could be that, or there are gaps when you look at, for example, you may not be aware of this, but if you look at the 8th grade math standards and you look at the algebra standards, you've got a lot of gifted kids and a lot of just talented math kids who take algebra as 7th or 8th graders and then maybe skip the content of 7th and 8th grade. If you look at the 8th grade standards, there are a number of standards that never get addressed for kids in 8th grade or in algebra that actually are on the 8th grade PSSA, for example. So you'll see that a lot of times gifted and talented kids will take the Keystone exam as 8th graders and the 8th grade PSSA, and they'll knock the Keystone out of the park and have no problems, but then they won't be proficient on the PSSA for 8th grade. And that primarily is because those standards were never taught for that kid.
Okay. Because they're being touched.
Why
Right, I mean, what kids that don't make it advanced then?
Sure, yeah, maybe they're proficient and not advanced, but they're definitely standard areas that are not addressed. A significant number. In fact, truthfully, if you looked at the standards, you'd be better off teaching the 8th grade in that scenario. You'd be better off teaching the 8th grade standards and adding in there the few algebra concepts that aren't taught in 8th grade. And they'd still do well on both those tests. But there's a significant number of 8th grade standards that are not addressed. So you want to be sure that you're aware of what standards all students need and that you're not missing any of them. It's just whether or not they're gifted, they're still required to master all standards. Now, they may already have that, which is fine. If your present levels of educational performance indicate they have it, you don't need to teach it. But if not, you need to make sure you're addressing it. Okay? So regardless of what you've identified based on the data, you've got to write in the bottom half of the NORA, there are 2 areas that you write a narrative on. The first one is reasons the recommendation is appropriate. So you're just going to include the present level of educational performance, what the GMDE team input that they provided, and any other factors that made you go in this route of recommendation. Okay? So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to read that. I don't want to read it for the whole group. So take a minute to read that bold section, that bold narrative piece, just on the recommendation, why it's appropriate. Do you need another minute? Okay, let me pull up, or let me point out a couple of things. Remember when we were gathering the data, we were looking at this data, we were looking at, even when we were looking at summative data, we were looking at end of the first marking period of 6th grade. So we're gathering data after the first 9 weeks of 6th grade. So this GIEP that's going to be written is going to be written, right, they're a year, right? So we're writing this GIEP, looks like, in all likelihood, we might be writing this in October or November. So we've got to address 6th grade, but we also have to address what we're going to be doing at the beginning of 7th grade. So that's also why you may see multiple years across in this particular piece, right? So all we've done in that written section is we explained what the data is showing us. We explain what the team identified. We talk about the students' interests and information that we have here that helped us to say, here's what we need to do. Questions about that? Does that example help?
Yes.
Yeah, so you feel like you could use this to help guide your own developments? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I want people to walk away saying, okay, I can do this. I don't want anybody to be not sure.
I just have,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I just have a question about, and maybe you were going to talk about this, the second part.
Uh-huh.
You know, I'm fine with writing that when we're making the decision, okay, this year we're going to accelerate this student, we're going to use curriculum compacting, these are the things we're going to do. Then the following year, when I have students who are taking Algebra 2 in 8th grade, so next year they'll be in honors pre-calculus. Obviously, they have a 98 in Algebra 2, that's the next step for them.
Mm-hmm.
So to come up with an option that was rejected almost seems like you're making something up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I got to tell you.
back to grade level is an option. I mean, it's not really. You're just going to do what's the best thing for them. So sometimes I feel like I'm making up an option that we rejected just to put something there. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does, and I don't disagree with you. There's a section on my ESL progress reports that I'm required every 9 weeks to do the same thing. Even in coursework when I'm designing lessons with my teachers, what are some things that you chose to do and then rejected? Like sometimes I feel like we're making it up because. Maybe part of the reason we're making it up is because our past experience and our background knowledge tells us that stuff doesn't work, we're moving on.
Right.
We're doing the next thing. So a lot of times it's just we have so much experience that we know that's with this kid and their experience that's not necessary. But sometimes you might consider things. Unfortunately, I don't have a better answer than you're right. I sometimes think
Okay. So, I mean, just to put something and then to say
Yeah.
this is why
Yeah,
what we're
the
doing
reality
is
is-
appropriate is okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
the reality is we didn't design this form, Somebody
Right.
who sat in a room and thought, well, they better be thinking about all kinds of things and they better be able to tell us why they rejected this.
And it kind of makes sense the first year
Sure.
that you're doing some of those things, but in the subsequent year, it just doesn't.
Yeah.
It just sounds awkward, I guess. So I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a better way to do that.
Or if you originally were designing it and where you thought the student was going to go to the next level, but it turns out that they really struggled. We missed the mark.
Right.
Then it makes sense that we're going to adjust and do something different. But yeah, if things are moving along just as we expected, yeah.
Okay.
Or I would also argue if a kid's getting a 97 percentile, should we be enriching in addition to the acceleration?
Right. And
So you
those-
could
and
maybe
those are
put those
things we
things.
consider. So maybe we could add that as
Yeah.
another. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So I didn't really have you read that piece, but we sort of talked about it in that last section. That's really all you're saying. Okay, what are some other things that we considered and were rejected, and why were they rejected? Any issues about that now? Mike, do you have any additional insight since you were had the illustrious honor of being probably the only school in a decade that's been audited in Beaver County?
No, I think, the example that you shared was great because this was one of the areas that we were encouraged to improve on, is just increasing the detail in the options considered and exactly what you talked about. So I think that was a great example to share. Because I write all of our NORAs, so that kind of fell on me to improve upon that. But I think you hit it on the head with just having a lot of details in the present levels, and then just kind of cutting and pasting that. But I agree with what Sarah was saying too, because a lot of times I feel like I'm just kind of making it up.
Oh,
You know, that
absolutely.
I put in there options considered. Well, exiting gifted support. That's what I put. Because
Yeah.
really, you consider all the options, and at the end of the day, you're going to keep them in and you're going to exit them. And they told me that wasn't good enough. And
Did they tell you couldn't put that in there?
no, they didn't tell me that I couldn't put it in there. They just wanted to. They want me to expand on why that was. They want me to make up more stuff. In my opinion, is what they
Yeah.
what they wanted.
Why was that considered? Why did you reject it? Yeah.
Right.
And I
Right,
feel
right.
like it's the same thing. Like I have this requirement to do it for English language learners too. And I feel like I'm making it up. Like we are already designing instructions specifically for one student, right? If we're doing that right, what's all this stuff about what we considered and rejected? Every single moment I'm thinking about only this kid and exactly where this kid is. So I totally get where you're coming from on there, but sometimes we just got to fill out paperwork the way they want us to fill it out.
Exactly.
Okay, what other questions do you guys have? Anything for me? Anything that you felt like maybe didn't quite get addressed for you yet?
In support services, when there's a student going from 6th to 7th grade,
Uh-huh.
and I was told I have to put my name because I'm the present gifted teacher, but meanwhile, this is May, and they're gonna be at the 7th grade with a different gifted teacher. Does that make sense to you that I have to put my name to carry out that responsibility of GIEP in support services? I was told that's what I have to do. If it's May and that child is with
Right.
me and will be with a different teacher in the fall, I'm not gonna have any responsibility for
They
that child
may
because they're
be-
no longer gonna be with me.
They may be in our school, they may need to a 5th grade IEP last year for the middle school because I was going to have after next.
I do that. I go to all the ones that 6th grade that are coming up to the middle school, so that I'm there for the meeting.
So you're
and there's
part of the
continuity. Yeah, so there's
And your name
continuity
is
in
in the
that,
support service area?
if it needs to be.
I can give an example on that, Christine, if you want.
Oh, that would be great. I was letting them work this out themselves. I was going to interject if need be, but yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So
They were doing just
I mean,
fine all on their own.
We deal with that all the time too. I mean, the same kind of thing, right? We're implementing an IEP today that finishes out this year, but then carries on next year, could be different. So how we do that is we just put for the 15-16 school year, teacher A, we list both teachers in there and just identify the school year. So for 15-16, it's this teacher. For 16-17, that, it's gonna be a different person.
And you can modify the dates. So I just wrote one for a student who's going to middle school. So I'm putting from April 2016 to June 9th, 2016. I will be responsible, and then from August 28th or whatever. So you just modify those dates. Would be my understanding. Not that that's correct.
That's how we've been doing it though, and
No, it makes perfect sense.
and we were okay with that last week, so I'll take it as.
Yeah, I don't think that that's a problem. And you wouldn't want to have somebody's name on there, or even if it was, you wouldn't want to have somebody identified as being responsible who in no way is going to be responsible, because that's, if in fact things don't get implemented, that's coming back on that district as not being an IEP that was implemented, or a GIEP that was implemented appropriately. And it could come back on that teacher for not implementing something when they were responsible for it, even though you didn't really have the ability to be responsible for it. Other questions?
Could you give some examples of support services that are common, I guess, that might be needed? Sometimes I'm not sure exactly what all would go through a support service.
Yeah, I don't know that I could answer that question in terms of what's common. Can I throw that out to the group and let's hear what they say and
Yeah, sure.
see if that helps you enough? If not, I will research for you and get back to you with that answer, because I don't want to give you an inaccurate one.
And depending on the student, I put academic aids, anything that's, in addition to flexible scheduling, I always incorporate that, especially if they're an accelerated student.
We do transportation to and from gifted sponsors.
Oh yeah, that might be needed, sure. What about, you do, for any of your gifted kids, do you do anything about organizational skills or study skills? You ever met a gifted kid who's a hot organizational mess?
Yeah.
We have a few of those, right?
Put that in.
Super.
That's the goal.
Not
Not as a goal.
You can't
Not
put
as a
it in as a
goal.
goal. You can't put it in as a goal.
Right.
But that's why I'm saying you could put it in as a support service. Sure.
Okay.
We also do, under flexibility in the schedule is being excused from class for gifted sponsored events, and that's with the understanding that the student is responsible for making up their.
Okay.
I do a specific one, because the PE teachers give points for everyday attendance. So my kids are excused from making up those participation
Oh,
points.
see, ours are not allowed to be excused
Yeah.
by our.
I would not excuse.
They have to go run 20 minutes on the treadmill for
Now,
every field
if my
trip that they
kids are
take.
on an enrichment trip,
Yep.
they do not have to
They
make up
will
those
not, I've
participation
been
points.
round and round.
I like that her district lets them
And they said that it's a state requirement, so it cannot be waived.
Yeah, no, my school lets me do it.
Are they saying that the course itself is?
Yeah, the course itself is a state requirement.
Yes.
Right, but
I had
the amount of kids still taking the course.
Yeah, they just
They're
don't do the
just-
points for that one day.
Yeah, they're not.
I've even had parents that come back and say, my kid is, like, won the state championship in Taekwondo. They're
And you get-
really, really athletic. Can they, they miss 5 days of PE for gifted things, and their schedule is such, they have no free time to go run. They would have to stay after school. It doesn't seem fair.
I have to say, we're in the same district. I don't understand how we're saying at the high school level.
That's
we
what
can
I
waive
asked the PE teacher. I said at the high school level, we can miss a whole year. What's going on
That's
here?
a disconnect in our district. We need to take.
Sounds like a conversation that should be taken up at the central office level, if you're in the same district.
Mr. Perry is.
Can I talk to Mr. Perry? I can talk to Mr. Perry, sure.
I always feel bad because I feel like gym seems to be the thorn in the side, particularly for the athletic kids. They want to do these things that are enriching in their strength area and helping with their goal. They're in all of these sports, but they have to keep taking PE. That's why, I'm going to go back and say, look, hey, Central Valley business.
1 year.
Yeah, and it's like, I understand there's the health aspect and all of the standards and yada, yada, yada. But when they're in like 5 sports, they're getting their exercise.
Well, I got to tell you that schools like PA Cyber, things, charter schools, et cetera, they have to master the same standards you have to master, and they use lots of things to qualify as having met the standards. For example, kids have memberships to the Y and have to show their attendance of having gone, et cetera. So if,
we ran into a lot of union issues.
Oh, yeah,
Kids
because now
are
you're
coming off
taking away from the
roll.
gym teacher.
They took a cyber gym, did like a PE log.
yeah, no, I'm not saying take cyber gym. I'm saying a kid who's in that regular PE class and missed 5 days, the district ought to find a way to work within what the other things the child is doing to justify the makeup of that. That's all I was arguing.
They're giving them written essays. If they would have to stay after school, they're giving them an alternative written assignment.
Yeah, it sounds like a conversation you want to have with your building administrators and central office and just come up with a consistency across the district. I don't think we can solve that for you.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah. Pardon?
Sarah, I also put consultation with Premier and teachers.
Yeah.
for academic year.
She
was talking to them.
That you do that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Does that help? Did you get enough for support
Yes, thank-
services? Okay,
Yes.
great. I thought the collective brain power in the room would be much more beneficial than my own. So
I just wanted to see if I was on this kind of
Yeah.
right track.
absolutely, it's
Okay.
why it's good to throw it out to the rest of the field and see what they what questions they have.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Are every one of you, and you do not have to answer this question, but I'm going to throw it out. Are you all on PDE SAS, and do you all belong to the gifted ed professional learning community in SAS?
Yes.
As if you are not, I would strongly encourage you to do so. And if you're not sure how to do that, shoot me an email. Again, clw@bviu.org. I can talk to you on the phone while you're sitting at your computer, and we can hook you up together. Tanya Moret, who is the she works at Capillary IU, but she's contracted by PDE to be placed at Capillary IU. She really is our professional learning support in terms of gifted ed, and 90% of the materials that I give to you come from her, or that I modify specifically for Beaver County. She has placed in that gifted learning community literally everything, the most current information, as well as all the professional development, including webinars she's held and recordings, etc. That's the most up-to-date, most relevant place that you're going to find information on gifted. So I would encourage you to belong to it if you don't already.
Christine, can I add to that real quick?
Yeah.
They shared with us last week too that Tanya also created a YouTube channel.
Yes.
That is Gifted in PA.
Yeah.
YouTube channel, and she uploads the same thing. All those webinars and everything are on there as well. So
Well, the link in the link in SAT, or the link to that YouTube channel is in that PLC. So literally everything she does she puts in that PLC so you can link out of there. So as long as you can get to that, you can get to the rest of it. I will say though, that in the new mobile SAS, when you belong there, sometimes it's hard to find the material. When you scroll down, there's a button that says manage content. To me, that seems like, it's not intuitive. To me, that would mean, oh, if I click that, I'm gonna like be able to delete stuff, and you can't. Manage content means let me see all the stuff that's there. It's kind of bizarre, but make sure you click manage content, then you'll have access to everything that's in it. And to my knowledge, it's the only gifted PLC on SAS. There might be another one, but just make sure the moderator is Tanya Moret, and then you'll be okay. You'll be choosing the right one. Any other questions?
Spell that last name, Moret, M-O-R-R.
M-O-R-R-E-T-T, yeah. It looks sunny there. Is it warm?
Not really.
No, it's deceptive. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. And unless you have something else, I'm gonna end this section. You guys are free to stay there as long as you want. Talk about whatever you need. Email me if you need something. Happy to help. If I can't answer a question, I'm not gonna give you an answer, but I will always go find the answer. And Mike's in the room; he can tell you that that's true. That I do that for anything. So if you have a question, just shoot it to me. If I don't know it, I'll find out and I'll get back to you ASAP. Good luck. Hope this is what you needed. And
Yes, thank you.
I hope this format worked okay. Thanks for being willing to do it. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Oh, I'll send
Thank
out
you.
sure. I'll send out the link to the recording to your leader, to your group leader, and they can get it out to everybody then. Okay? Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you.